And welcome back to another edition of what I like to call From Nonsense to God Sense, as we take a look at the things that go on in this world through a biblical perspective, because oftentimes through the worldly lens we get confusion, and God always gives us clarity when we ask for it. And so that's what we try to do, is get that biblical clarity on how to look at things, especially here in 2020, a wacky year it's been for the world. And now in the political age, the political time, as we approach the elections coming up here in November, we've got Dan Delzell with us. And Dan, thanks again for joining us this week.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Son. Thanks for having me back.
Hey, so we've been kind of talking about in the past a lot of issues, a lot of spiritual things, a lot of biblical things, and we still do that, but we're kind of taking a focus more on the political edge from it and looking at the politicians and the elections and the things that are going on. I think last time we talked about the debates that went last night. As of this taping, there was supposed to be a second debate, but that fell through because of several reasons. One which came out was the fact that there was some shenanigans, as they call it, with the moderator who sent a tweet to somebody and then said his account was hacked, and then that turned out to be a lie. And so then they wanted to also do it via Zoom or teleconference, and the Trump administration was like, no, we're not going to do that. And so there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's really kind of sad that we have this political ideology going on in the country, that we have to do all this stuff, this tomfoolery, to be able to get our candidate elected. We have to, use Twitter to block stories that are pretty, earth-shattering when you think about it, and the American people ought to know about it. And so then you've got also, the treatment between the two candidates. And it was evident last night in the two, I guess you can call them town halls, although I don't think they were really town halls. They were just two extreme ends of a conversation about what's going on with the political climate and the platforms and the campaigns of the two candidates. Biden, he was with George Stephanopoulos on ABC, and then President Trump, he was on NBC with Savannah Guthrie, and it was polar opposites on how the nights went for each of the candidates.
Yeah, it was quite striking, Son. And as you were speaking, I just was reminded that even though Donald Trump obviously is not the Messiah, Jesus handled that one quite well. We don't look for another Messiah. We don't need another Messiah. Jesus is on such a higher plane than any political leader, and he's the one we follow. On a political level, there seem to be some real similarities between the way many in the media treat Donald Trump and the way that they push their own agenda. And last night was another case in point where, as you say, it was going to be their second debate, but it ended up, because of some circumstances, becoming two town hall meetings. But it didn't really turn out to be that, at least not for Donald Trump. I've heard today that Samantha Guthrie of NBC ended up asking him, I believe, 43 questions, really just peppering him and pressing him and giving him some of the toughest questions in terms of just personal things. Not tough in the sense that he didn't have great answers, because he did, but I mean, she went to like the biggest talking points for Biden's camp, issues that they would want to press and many times misrepresent. 43 times she asked a question versus 10 of the people's questions who were supposed to be having a town hall meeting. So it was not a town hall meeting; it was a setup. But that's what we've come to expect from so many in the media. Meanwhile, over on ABC, George Stephanopoulos, a big Democratic experienced person with different candidates over the years, he's there giving softballs, just lobbing softballs into Joe Biden, and not one question about the hot story, at least hot in terms of what should have been all over every newspaper, but Twitter shut it down. And so they did not allow the story that the New York Post broke here in the last few days about Hunter Biden's laptop and the content and messages on there that contradict what Joe Biden had said about supposedly his lack of knowledge of Hunter's dealings with Ukrainian leaders and others. So completely contradicted that. But, when the New York Post broke that story, Twitter proceeded to shut it down. And so, of course, now they're facing a huge backlash, including some in Washington who are have now called their CEO in to answer questions on what they've done. I think Twitter's realizing that they obviously, overstepped. They've been doing it more quietly in terms of pushing their agenda, trying to promote their candidate. Very much the way, the Pharisees worked against Jesus. And that's why I made the Messiah reference. Not that Donald Trump is our Messiah, but because he pushes for freedom, so many in the mainstream media, they seem to hate him. And, the Pharisees, Son, they hated Jesus because he was free, because he wasn't pushing their agenda. He came with the truth. And so, last night was just another case in point where those who are controlled by a dark ideology and who want to promote, really just a very narrow, power-oriented agenda, really tried to go to bat for their candidate, and they really tried to take down, once again, President Trump. But, it's funny, Son, because even there with the NBC town hall, supposedly, there was this woman in the back behind Trump, and she kept nodding all the time, when he would say things. And it was so funny because it's the last thing NBC would have wanted. You had people out on Twitter, who are anti-Trumpers, who were just bemoaning the fact that why is NBC allowing her to be there? Why they don't like that, that image of somebody being there supporting what he's doing. But I just thought that was so funny. Even though they tried to torpedo Trump, 43 questions from the so-called, moderator, whatever her role was going to be, 10 from the people. But that goes to show, Son, those who want power, they don't care what the people want. They have an agenda, and they don't want the people to make up their own mind. And this is why it's such an important election, because America has always been about freedom of speech, hearing everybody's ideas. But the minute you start shutting down news reports, are we living in Cuba? What is this? And so Twitter has a lot to answer for, but it's not like all of a sudden this is some new ideology or practice for them. They've been doing this in many ways for a long time, and now more and more people are going to start to see how big tech really is in the back pocket of the DNC and of this agenda that they have, and much of it is being driven by the far left. Much of it is being driven by people who are using Joe Biden as a pawn, and once he gets in there, they plan to push their agenda on everything further and further to the left. That's their goal. That's obvious, and those who see it are rightly concerned. That this election is so critical, and that freedom be continuing in America and not come under the control of those who want to shut out every other voice and want to pack the courts and want to just take control and shut the other side down.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce her name, but Mayra Jolie, I believe, was the lady behind Trump that was nodding. She was, I guess is an immigration attorney, and she is a pro-Trump activist, obviously. But I think she ran for Congress 2 years ago, or maybe 2 years ago, something like that. But I think they identified her as Mayra Jolie, and so she was back there supporting everything that Trump pretty much had to say. And it's like you said, it's interesting because there's two things going on here. One, these moderators, it's all about them. In the political world, the politicians, whenever they come up with something, it's all about them and advancing their career. And it's the same with moderators too. When you're a moderator, you're out there to try to make your name for yourself. So I would imagine that Savannah Guthrie was, patting herself on the back last night, saying what a great job she did. In her circles was probably getting praised, and she's probably talking about it this morning. And so I can kind of see a little bit of it because that's the media, makeup. That's just what they do. But then on the flip side, when you're in a political environment that is dubbed a town hall that is supposed to be of the people, by the people, for the people, and you dominate, monopolize the conversation, then why don't you call it something different and just call it for what it is? And the other thing too I thought was interesting was that the questions that some of these participants that were actually, I guess, the people, they were writing, I'm thinking to myself, okay, they did not write these questions because normal people don't think of these things. Like when someone got up there and was like, okay, and they're reading like this very formalized question about corporate taxes in America. And I'm thinking to myself, you're a you don't care about corporate taxes. You're not in the corporate world. What are you talking about? You know? And then someone else comes up with, I want to know about this. It's like, no, you don't. You don't care about that because that has nothing to do with you. It's like you should be asking questions that are, what you want to know about. But the questioning was just very bizarre because I don't think any of these people wrote their own questions. One, because it just didn't seem to fit with what they were doing. Here's Susie Homemaker asks a question. Yeah, the corporate taxes in America. And it's like, you don't care about corporate taxes. You're not in the corporate world. But I did think the president shined. I think he did shine in a tough environment, a hostile environment. I think he works well in those environments too.
Well, I think he does too, Son. And, again, this was right on the heels of the New York Post breaking this story. When Joe Biden was vice president, he was assigned two countries, Russia and Ukraine. Lo and behold, who is it that his son starts making, millions of dollars from without any experience? But officials and from these countries and from companies in their countries, including $3.5 million from the wife of a former mayor of Moscow. I mean, it just goes on and on. The Burisma corruption that involved not only Hunter Biden but his family. That should be the front page story of the New York Times. But no, instead they don't touch it. What they'll put out there is stuff about Donald Trump's taxes, and they don't worry about whether it was obtained legally or not. I mean, I don't know. Many say it wasn't, but they don't worry about that. Trump explained that. I thought very well last night to Samantha Guthrie when she pressed him on that. But they'll print that without a second thought, and Twitter doesn't think to shut that down. Of course, that and all sorts of other fake news. But then when a legitimate story, at least as far as we know, I mean, the way it's been explained, this whole laptop situation, it'd be pretty hard to invent that. And they're talking to the guy who owns the, they've interviewed him on TV, the guy who owns a little shop that the laptop was dropped off at, and the different people now who have the information of the thousands of emails, and, they have all these photos of Hunter Biden. But most importantly, they have information that connects, Joe Biden to meeting, some officials, and then the money that flowed from those governments or those companies to the Biden family. So this should be on the front page, but of course it's not. I commend the New York Post. I mean, my goodness, they're doing what few news outlets were willing to do. Of course, Fox News then started to get on board, and they're running with it. But other than that, it was really interesting, Sam, because I did a Google search for Hunter Biden emails. I haven't done it on maybe the last day or so, but I did that a number of times over a couple of days, and I was stunned that other than the New York Post, other than Fox News, there were so few even articles about this, and certainly nothing from ABC News or NBC News or CBS. Meanwhile, if something can come out there with just a hint of something that might relate to Donald Trump, they're going to run with it. They're going to plaster it all over everything. And so, from day one with the Russian collusion hoax, which now has been exposed, everything that Hillary did to initiate that. I mean, Trump has had one hand tied behind his back from day one. He's had, key figures in the FBI and other, agencies seemingly out to get him. Obviously, the Obama administration, out to get him. And yet here he is, because the people, Son, recognize that we want someone who's about freedom, not trying to control us, not trying to change America. That's what the Pharisees wanted to do to Jesus. They wanted to change Jesus. They wanted him to be like them. They wanted him to shut up. They didn't want him to bring what he was claiming was the truth, and it was the truth, but they didn't believe it. They didn't believe his claim. And yet we who know Jesus as Savior, Son, we know that he is the way, the truth, and the light. And that's why Christians are so concerned about freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. We're so thankful for the Judeo-Christian heritage we have in America. We don't want to see it taken away by a leftist agenda. And make no mistake about it, Son, the far left, they are just itching to get in control. And you see what they want to do. I mean, they want to turn Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico into states so they can get 4 more Democratic senators. They want to control the Senate. They want to control the House. They want to control the White House. And they're fit to be tied because a beautifully gifted, intelligent judge is now about to be appointed to the Supreme Court that does not support their desire to see partial birth abortion continue and all other forms of abortion continue, who is not willing to come out and say, yeah, I stand with you for same-sex marriage to be celebrated and promoted. I stand with you for, the thing that Joe Biden said last night, which is that he's for an 8-year-old being able to choose to be transgender, even though many of us, son, recognize that is child abuse. It is child abuse when a child, rather than being given counseling, and when children are given counseling over their gender dysphoria, their gender confusion, 90-some% will grow out of it. They will kind of settle into the gender that God made for them to be. But Biden made it very clear last night with what I'm sure was a staged question, just like all of the other ones I think last night. This woman stands up and claims to have an 8-year-old. Well, she does. I mean, I'm not questioning that, but she said she has an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, and then her youngest is now transgender. I mean, that's a tragedy, son. That's a tragedy for that child. It's tragic that child is not being given counseling to walk through, where their confusion is rooted. But that's what's going on right now. And, we just have to pray. We have to pray for our nation. We have to pray for President Trump, and we have to pray for those that are just working for a leftist America, that they do not succeed. Because if they do, son, we won't even recognize this country. I mean, we've already seen so many things that are so different in terms of freedoms that we've enjoyed as a nation. But I mean, it is going to get far worse if the far left agenda is thrust upon us the way that those on that side are hoping it will be.
Dan, we're in a situation here in California where we've seen churches like John MacArthur be attacked, be persecuted is the correct word, I would imagine, about opening up services. Okay, our governor is and our city mayor, Garcetti and Newsom, the governor of California, they really come down on religion. They really, talk about Twitter. Everybody's in an uproar over Twitter censoring this story about the Hunter Biden emails. But yet there's very little outrage, except maybe locally here, where you have a church being told and persecuted that they can't meet, which goes against the very fabric of the foundation of our country and the Constitution and our freedom of religion, freedom of gathering. They're all for the protesting, but yet for gathering of church. And then you also have things like, we're in this school environment. We're here in California, especially Los Angeles, where students are going to school online via, whether it's Zoom or whatever. And yet they're expected to do things. They're expected to follow the rules. They're expected to do their work and stuff. And yet last night you talked about the Biden town hall, and he's saying things, okay? It's like, where has truth gone? Where has honesty gone? We want our kids to rise up and follow rules and things like that, and to speak truth. And if they lie to a teacher, then it's horrible. But yet you have Biden up there actually just literally telling lies about what things that maybe the president had said. Like, for example, he went out there and said that the president actually said if you inject bleach into your arm, you're going to be cured from corona. And he never said that. It's been fact checked. He's never said that. And people are allowing these lies. And any politician, it could be any politician. I'm just using Biden as an example because that's our jumping off point in the conversation. And it's like these things are being said and they're lies. And yet we see that from the politicians that are running our country. And we see that from even teachers. When I was teaching at a community college here locally, there were teachers that were lying. There were teachers that were, encouraging law breaking when it came to immigration, DACA students, Dreamers. And not cooperating with federal government. That was a policy for the campus, for the college. And yet then we're supposed to turn around as teachers and not, and get after students for plagiarism and things like that. It's like the double standard is huge in America today. That's like, where is the values? Where is the decency? Where is that truth, justice, and American way that we once knew? It's not there anymore. It's now all about sleaze. It's all about lying. It's all about deception. It's all about doing what I can do to get what I want out of whatever it is I'm in this case, a political election. I mean, it's completely out of control how far down the rabbit hole this country has gone and the stronghold that Satan has on the people here in this country.
Well, there's no doubt about that, Son. And I have a thought about immigration that you stirred in my thinking I'll make here in a moment. But first, let me just say what you're describing, Son, with these lies. I mean, we saw it last night by the Presidential Debate Commission making such terrible decisions, not consulting, for example, the Trump campaign, not working out a plan. We ended up with Americans not being allowed to have these two men in the same room with just an honest and open debate. And so what did we end up with, Son? On one channel, we had Joe Biden lying again about the claim that Donald Trump wants to take away insurance for those with pre-existing conditions. And of course, we heard this from Democratic senators, during the Amy Coney Barrett hearings. Once again, Joe Biden spouted this lie again last night. Meanwhile, on the other channel, Donald Trump is being questioned by Samantha Guthrie on that very issue. And once again, he's making it clear, we have a plan to replace Obamacare. We are not going to take away, the insurance for those with pre-existing conditions. We're going to provide for that. I mean, it's kind of like this claim that Trump is a racist, a white supremacist. How many times does he have to say over how many years what his position is? But it gets twisted. In fact, I even saw a commercial today, Son, that pushed this lie. They're trying to stir up fear among people that said that Trump is going to take away your insurance if you have a pre-existing condition. That's his goal. And it's 70% of Americans, I believe the statistic was, are concerned about that or something with that statistic. But my point is, it was a lie. And, as far as immigration is concerned, isn't it interesting, Son? The last election, there was so much talk about, build the wall and so much talk about immigration. But, there's a definite silence on the side of the left now when it comes to immigration. And I suspect partly what's going on there, Son, is this. I think the left has been a bit surprised to see how many Latinos are going for Trump. How many, for example, Cubans in Florida, but not only there, but how many other, just how many others are going for Trump. And so I suspect they're starting to rethink. They figured, well, because they didn't care about that group of people, they just wanted another voting bloc. And so they thought, we're going to do with this voting bloc what we've done with Black America for decades. And we have done things in a way trying to give them, everything we can, which, by the way, has not, as we know, helped the Black community at all. Donald Trump has done far more to help the Black community with jobs, with real progress, not just with handouts, not just becoming enslaved to this, entitlement idea of just having everything given to you. That's all the left seems interested in. We'll give you whatever we can give you to get your vote, but it's not working, I don't think, the way they thought it would. And so you don't hear them talking as much about immigration. It'll be very interesting to see if now this millennial generation, if they're able to snap out of the stupor that they have been placed into by many of their educators, if they'll be able to see what really is behind socialism, if they'll be able to really honestly realize what would happen if America were to go the way of Venezuela, for example. And by the way, on that issue too, so not only is their economy a disaster down there and is socialism just so wrecked that country, but you know what else has? They packed the courts. They've packed the courts for years, and it has not worked. It's been a disaster. So, you may get those people in there that you want and that only are going to say yes to you and are never going to challenge your ideas, but it will bring your country down if you don't have a healthy back and forth on many different ideas. And so the agenda of the left is absolutely destructive and deadly for America. And as you and I know, Son, far worse than just economic death, far worse than just national death, is spiritual death. And so, shutting down churches, shutting down the proclamation of the gospel, they don't realize that they're putting people in harm's way for eternity, who are going to miss out on knowing Jesus is Savior, going to end up going to hell rather than to heaven. But, the left isn't thinking about any of that. All they're looking at is power, control. What can we do to completely radicalize this country? What can we do to tear it down so we can build it back up? And as someone on that side said, with all the riots, we need to burn it down. And that's exactly what many on the left, not all, but many on the left, and certainly the far left, that's what they're about. We need to burn it down. We need to replace it. And this certainly seemed to be, President Obama's agenda. It certainly seems to be Kamala Harris's agenda. I'm not sure whether Joe Biden is as much of a diehard as Kamala Harris and Barack Obama when it comes to some of that hardcore leftist ideology. He may be, but he certainly will not be able to stop it, and he certainly doesn't seem to be bothered by it at all.
Dan, you mentioned the comment last night by Joe Biden that 8-year-olds should be allowed to decide they are transgender. And I'm always curious because there's been an onslaught against kids, against our children. It starts with, abortion. And whether you're pro or against it, if you're really honest, whether you're for abortion or against it, if you're really honest, especially if you're for it, you would really be accepting of the fact that a life is being taken. You can still be for it, but if you deny that a life is being taken, then I think that's where you really have a serious problem. If you admit that I'm still for it, but life is taken, then I can understand that, okay, you're still taking a position and you're understanding the ramifications of it. Now we've gotten to the point where we have this transgendered. And first off, I'm humored by the fact that we have the LGBT and the B in it stands for bi, and bi means two. And yet we go beyond that and we're supposed to have more than two genders out there. So I'm amused by the fact that they have a bi in there because bi means two. And so I guess we're kind of contradicting ourselves there anyways. But what's this assault? I don't understand why people need to have this power or this desire or this drive to make people transgendered. Again, it's the people that won't do it themselves. It's the people that, are out there. And I get the feeling that some of it is, it's kind of like this. If you're in Los Angeles or California, you get a new dog. It has to be a rescue so that you can have approval of the people that you show the dog to. Okay. Oh, look at my new pet. That's a rescue. I didn't ask you where you got it, but you just voluntarily throw that out because that is the qualifier to make it so that you adopted or you got a pet that's worthy of others to, bestow upon you.
Give you praise.
Yes, give you praise for saving this dog. Yeah. And it's almost like that. It's like, some people will allow their kid to be transgendered because they want the praise of everybody else around them. But why is it that we have this assault on young people? Like an 8-year-old, first of all, doesn't know anything about sex to begin with. So how would they know if they're transgendered or not? And then what's the push for it? It's gotten to the point where we have to have laws as to whether or not there's transgender therapy or whether, a person can go into, a mental health expert and talk to them. Even with abortion, people forget the fact that in some places, if you are under a certain age or like, let's say 15, 16, you don't have to have parents' consent to get an abortion, and parents don't need to be notified. But what people don't realize is that in some places, if it's under 18, that's statutory rape. And more people are more concerned with getting rid of the baby than the statutory rape that took place with the 15-year-old having sex to begin with. It's just crazy.
Well, it is, son. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking about how, so many on the left, they want to control and practically remove, free speech, it seems, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, this open and free flow of ideas. They seem to want to remove that. But two areas that are striking where they don't want there to be any control, they don't want to limit anybody in any sort of sexual expression whatsoever, and they don't want to limit anyone with anything they might choose to do with an unborn baby, even partial birth abortion. So it's like, let's remove the restraints. Let's get rid of adultery, homosexuality, sexual fornication, and murder. Let's not call it those things. Let's call it, choice. Let's call it. I'll give you an example, son. Just this week. This is how fast things are moving. Okay. just this week in the hearings here for Amy Coney Barrett, the senator from Hawaii became concerned that Amy Coney Barrett used the phrase sexual preference. And many have used that phrase, including many Democrats, but now apparently that's no longer politically correct because those who are in the gay community and transgender community, I guess, they're offended, they say, by that because it's not a preference. It is just something they would claim you just have to live with because it's just who you are now permanently, which is interesting because you mentioned the B in that acronym there. Now, if you're bisexual, are we allowed to say that that person may prefer heterosexuality at sometimes and homosexuality at others? I mean, are we not allowed to say that? Are we not allowed to even say that bi means you sometimes have one preference or sometimes the other? I mean, that's how ridiculous and insane it is. And so not only that, Son, but like the day after that senator raised that point, I believe it was the Webster dictionary, the definition was now changed. Sexual preference now was labeled as something that's offensive to people to use that term. So this agenda on the left, not only does it seek to redefine a sexual ethic, but we see it in the dictionary, we see it in the courts, we see it in the classroom, we see it in the media. Once they decide what the next step is, then that gets pushed. And, you hear it with Biden, because Biden now says that the greatest need, the greatest freedom that we need today is the transgender issue is the most important issue facing us in the world today. Well, that's in his mind, Son, because the sexual revolution started the domino effect. And when, millions of people threw caution to the wind and said, we're going to have sex outside of marriage, not only because Hugh Hefner and the whole Playboy thing, shows us it's really cool to do that, but I mean, everybody knows that, it's just too, prudish, to do anything other than that. So this launch into all forms of fornication, but then it doesn't stop there because man's nature is such, Son, that once you throw caution to the wind and you don't abide by God's boundaries, then you find yourself needing more and wanting more. And then we saw the whole push for, homosexual activity, which, previously, even the American Psychological Association had identified that as a mental disorder that really needs counseling. Well, that was quickly pushed aside. I mean, how dare you say that somebody's sexual desires are in any way related to a mental, disorientation. No, it's not disorientation. It's simply their orientation. And so that got pushed, and then gay marriage was forced upon the nation by, they had enough votes for that. Just like there were enough votes for, Roe v. Wade at one point. And so now that all that's been done, they have to find something else. And so the latest thing that the devil is throwing at people and at young people are these transgender ideas in their mind, and then convincing parents and others to let's give these young people hormone suppressing drugs. Let's start to get them ready for body altering surgery. Never mind the fact, Son, that no one would dare to suggest to someone with anorexia that you have liposuction. No one would dare to, suggest that sort of radical surgery just because somebody in their mind thinks they're overweight when they're really not. No, never mind that. In the area of sexuality, people, folks are so far gone in terms of no bearings whatsoever, no foundation. But this is what happens, Son, to any of us. Once you throw caution to the wind and remove God's boundaries, you are at the mercy of the waves and the winds of culture, of your own emotions, of your own feelings. And then who among us isn't capable, Son, of trying to convince ourselves now that what has overtaken me, I have to somehow come up with a defense for. I have to make it not only acceptable for me, but I have to convince others that this can be right for anyone and everyone. And, the Bible says a man is a slave to whatever has mastered him. The founders of our country understood, Son, that self-restraint, self-control is a very important part of life and freedom and liberty. And what has happened in the last 50 years in America is that so many educators, so many in the culture have been promoting this idea of free sex, free this, free that. Well, it's not free, Son. It comes at a very high cost, and America is reaping what has been sown now with these false ideologies. And that's what makes it especially interesting that two of our Supreme Court justices, Justice Alito and Justice Thomas, recently in one of their I guess one of the cases they were looking at, they apparently, made reference to the fact that, we may need to go back and look at this whole, homosexual marriage, gay marriage issue, because it's having all these consequences for us now. Like, people are being forced to have to, bake a cake for a couple if it goes against your religious convictions, or take photographs at a wedding if it goes against your religious convictions. And so it's not at all in the spirit of America to force this upon people. But that's where the counterculture has taken us. And, every day it's like, buckle up, hang on, because I tell you, Son, you never know when a new term's going to come out. When a new term is deemed to be right or wrong, let's change the dictionary. Let's now tell the kids. Who would have thought 50 years ago? If you said to somebody, this little 8-year-old boy thinks, he wants to be a girl, or this little 8-year-old girl thinks she wants to be a boy. I mean, you might have locked somebody up if a teacher or parent, if they started, encouraging a young person to pursue that. But that's where we're at today. And, much prayer and wisdom is needed, and much education is needed, Son, because, it seems like we're just kind of going over a cliff, and we got to put the brakes on right away.
Dan, I've met some pretty cool transgendered people. Obviously met some gay people that are really cool.
Sure.
Befriended some of them.
Yes.
The one interesting thing, though, that, like all of us, we get conflicted, but the transgendered people, for some reason, really seem to be conflicted when you really get to talk to them, just talking to them. And so there's really something to that. There really is. And I've known a couple people, I won't say a few, but like at least two. And I'm not going to bring them up right now because I hate when people do that.
Yeah.
I know something, but I'm not going to tell you about it because it's a privacy issue. But I want it to be made known that I'm not just throwing things out there. People who have gone through a transition and then they've ended their own lives because of the conflict that they're feeling deep inside. So it's something more that's going on deep inside a person than just their outward appearance, outward gender, outward whatever it is that they're going through. And so we really need to address people in general as people that were created by God, regardless of who they are. And I think there might be a little bit of, I don't want to say fault, but I remember growing up when you deal with people that were, because I guess, homosexuality was always the like seen sin maybe, or like the taboo sin, or like the greatest sin, and it was always treated kind of that way. And so I think we've gotten to the point now where we need to realize that, it's no greater, no different than any other thing that I've done, you've done, or anybody else has done.
Right.
The ramifications might be, there's consequence to our actions. We all know that, there's consequences to our action. If I jump off a building, gravity is going to make me fall and I'm going to go splat. I'm going to be Wile E. Coyote. So there are ramifications and consequences to our actions. However, there seems to be certain activities in life that require or that result in more severe, consequences or actions or whatever. And so we have to remember, though, that no matter who we're dealing with, that they are children of God, whether or not they believe, and we need to treat them as such and not be so judgmental, and maybe be in a position where we can step in and maybe help them and be a comfort for them or be a shoulder to lean on or whatever the case may be, because they are hurting just like the rest of us are. Because whatever people are going through, if someone has gone through an abortion, I'm sorry, but those people that paint it as a rosy picture, I think Nikki, what's her name from the Buckinghams, Stevie Nicks, I think she just came out and said that if it wasn't for her abortion, then that ban never would have taken place. And I'm thinking, how sad is that? It's not rosy that because I've talked to people and I've seen people experience it. It is not a rosy picture. It's not all champagne, caviar and champagne, like that one guy used to say. When people go through these things, it's a very traumatic, it's a very life altering, it's a very emotional thing that they're going through, and there needs to be support for them. And so even though you might disagree with what they're doing, and you might not condone what they're doing, we can still be used to be there as a support system for them for the aftermath, because they need that more than anything at that time. You know, it's kind of like when the teen gets pregnant and then everyone jumps on them. You shouldn't have done that. You this, you that. Well, okay, it's too late for that. That's not the time for that. The time for that is past. Now the time is for, you know what? Okay, you are going to have a child. Let's make sure that you get the proper medical medical care. Let's make sure you have an environment that can love the kid. Let's make sure we do all these things, because what happens? And I'm sorry, but I'm just going to point out the church. When you go to the church, you get judgment, you get condemnation, you get gossiping, you get, oh, look what that person did. It's the taboo sin, the scarlet letter. When you go to the Planned Parenthood, you get everything's going to be okay. Where would you go? Would you go to the place where everything's going to be okay? Or are you going to go to the place where you get judgment, condemnation, and all that other stuff? And that's what we have to do.
Exactly.
We have to change so that when people come to us, we're the place where everything's going to be okay.
Yes. No, there's no doubt about it, Son. And so, yes, I mean, on one hand, we can talk about this issue in terms of how dangerous it is for children. We can talk about it in terms of the risk of suicide, which you referred to. And, they did a 30-year study in Sweden involving over 300 people. And, Son, they found that those who've had sex reassignment surgery are almost 20 times more likely to commit suicide. I mean, think about that. 20 times more likely to commit suicide than the rest of the population. So on one hand, we have a righteous indignation against a philosophy that is harmful to children, that is enslaving children. But on the other hand, we also have, as you're rightly pointing out, we have this huge call and need and responsibility for compassion to meet people where they're at. So just as you say, I mean, if we're engaging with someone, let's say, who is a transgender individual, as you say, I mean, we're all equally sinful before God. None of us are better or worse than the others. And we have to be accessible and open. And I love hearing, Tom, that you have friendships with folks, let's say, who are transgender. I mean, how else are we going to be able to reach someone who is in that situation with the love of Christ? And so we don't want anybody to feel as though we're condemning them, because that is never our place. Even Jesus did not condemn the woman caught in adultery. He said he didn't condemn her. He said that he came, to help her and to forgive her, and he said, "Go and sin no more." So that is to be our calling. And so, I really appreciate you making that point clear, because on one hand, we're dealing with the way a society is trying to force an ideology upon everybody. But then we also have to understand that when we talk about the dangers of that sort of enslavement of people's minds with such a dark ideology, that we're not suggesting that someone who's been caught up in that is somehow now, they're a bigger sinner because they got trapped into that. So we try to handle that, delicately. And both of these things then are needed. And of course, we live in a day, Son, where you're not supposed to challenge any of the newfangled definitions of gender or sex. You're not supposed to challenge any of those. And so, the Bible has been challenging newfangled definitions of sexual immorality and misinformation and disinformation. The Bible has been addressing that, for centuries. And so we just happen to live at a time where this is one area, gender and sex, where it has just exploded with variables and exploded with overwhelming desires that people are experiencing and engaging in, and we're all susceptible to it, and we're all sinful before God. We all are broken, and we're just trying to help one another and help others meet the Lord and find wholeness in Christ. And what Joe Biden said last night, that he supports an 8-year-old choosing to be transgender. This is not the path to wholeness. This is not the path to wellness. This is not the path to, certainly, it's not the path to finding a peaceful and enjoyable relationship with God, because you're going to be so distracted by what you've done to your body, by what's happened to your mind, that it's just going to set you on a course that God never intended you to be on.
The other thing that came up, which is quite dangerous depending upon how it's used, is court packing. It's like this, and the way they're talking about it nowadays, it's a revengeful thing. It's vengeful for putting, the new Supreme Court justice on the court before the next election. And
yes.
When it becomes a weaponized thing, all people, no matter what, should be concerned, because it's going to radically change a lot of things. And we mentioned a couple, you mentioned Cuba. I got a guy I went to school with that I reconnected with recently, and he was telling me his family's from Cuba, and he was telling me the before Castro and after Castro Cuba. And he gets upset when he hears people talking about socialism as it's a good thing, because his family has seen firsthand just how horrific that is. The promises that were made before that got everybody to want to have it, and then the realization afterwards when everyone was like, I can't believe I supported that. And that's what we're getting to. We're getting to the point where there's a lot of people that are wanting, because of their hatred for the current administration or whatever, they want things to be changed, but yet they don't realize that that very change they're crying for now is going to come back and haunt them, because it's going to negatively affect them in something that they want to do.
Yes. Well, that's right, son. And they're just looking at the short term, and yet it's such a dangerous thing to do, because again, all it would tend to do is let one group just dominate another group, rather than allowing this free exchange of ideas. And when you have a media that is so slanted toward really overhauling America and changing America from our basic approach to freedom and liberty and freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom to be able to disagree with one another, you're moving away from really what is a healthy and wholesome approach to governing and leading and watching over a nation, to one where it's just on lockdown. I mean, lockdown is a good word for it. Those who want to lock down ideas, they want to lock down society, they want to lock down people. Jesus came to set us free. Not to lock us down to become slaves of the government, or slaves of our passions, or slaves of newfangled ideas, or slaves of whatever is the current the current thing in society. So it really is a battleground for the mind today, and we do need to take every thought captive, as the Bible says, to make it obedient to Christ.
The other thing, too, people don't realize is that, okay, so the people that want to pack the court, for example, have this idea in mind, this utopia, that the people they put on the court and pack with are going to follow everything that they say. Who's to say that once they get on the court doesn't take a mind of its own and just take over the country? They don't think of the ramifications that, okay, politicians will say anything they want to get elected. How do we know that a Supreme Court justice nominee isn't going to say anything? I mean, it's still true, but isn't going to say anything or do anything to get nominated to a lifetime appointment. And then they all come together, and now you have this, 13 people or whatever now running the country, because you put them on there with the ultimate authority, and then there is no checks and balance anymore. So who's to say that people aren't going, so these people that want to basically pack the court think that the court is going to follow what they want, their agenda. That's not going to happen. Why isn't the court can take their own agenda and then screw everybody else, and then they're like, oh, what happened?
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right, son. And it's kind of related in a way to what I said a little while ago about how there are those on the left who have assumed that if we just open up borders, we're going to get all sorts of people to come into our country who are going to vote for us because we opened up the border. Because they're not going to be able to think for themselves. They're just going to be so thrilled with what we give them that they're not going to think through the policies. They're not going to be smart enough to do that. And this is the way the left has treated the black community for decades. This is the way I think the left has hoped to treat the Latino community. But I think that there are plenty of people in both of those communities who are realizing, you know what, we didn't come here to be treated like we're just pawns in your hands. We didn't even come here just to make our race our central identity. We came here because of the idea of America, that we're all equal, and that in a way that we can be colorblind. We're not here to just be these little voting blocks, so that you can have, few people, your few people in a position of power. We are here for our families. We are here for the nation. We're here for God, first and foremost, many people at least. And so, yes, it is interesting when those who devise a plan whereby they assume they're going to be able to control everything, when it starts to kind of turn around on them. And when those that they thought they could control, no longer are under the control they thought they would have. And we see this even, of course, with politicians, Son, and you'll see it the Democratic Party where, eventually they end up, eating one another. I mean, because at the end, there can only be one on the top. So they may work together for a while, but then eventually, they'll end up turning on their own, because that's just the nature of politics eventually. And, once the Clintons were no longer useful to the party, it was time to move on. And that's just the nature of politics. Fortunately, our God never moves on. He never gets tired of us. He never, God is for us today, tomorrow, and forever, through Jesus, our Savior. So it's the message of Christ that we want to bring to people's lives and hearts and minds. And that's where the real power and peace is at, Son. And so, we have opportunities for that today, even in the midst of such a, conflicted political environment and culturally conflicted environment that we live in today.
Yeah, and ultimately, when it comes down to it, God's in control. Obviously, with a sinful nature that we live in this world, there's going to be things that go on that, happen because of the consequence of sin, and we have to deal with it as people, whether it be, the people we choose to run for office and the decisions they make, or whether the things we decide and choose for in our life and the ramifications that come from that. But ultimately, God's in control. And more importantly, no matter if we have never accepted him or never believed in him, or if we have and we've maybe gone our own way and kind of done our own thing and decided, this really isn't working out, I got to come back. He accepts us no matter who we are, what we've done, where we've been. And he will always be there embracing us and welcoming us back to him, because all we have to do is believe, repent, and confess, and then he will accept us and bring us to heaven, and we can have eternity with him.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful message, isn't it, Son? I mean, the message of the gospel, that we're all broken, we're all flawed individuals, we've all sinned, we've all fallen short, and yet when we come to Jesus in repentance and faith, when we come to the cross, when we come as sinful human beings in need of a Savior, the Lord is there with open arms to receive us, to welcome us into his family. And this is the message that we have for the world. This is the message God's given us for the world. And it's on a higher level than even any message of freedom in America that we love to promote, because we love to see people experience all levels of freedom, not just spiritual freedom, but the highest message, of course, by far, is this message of spiritual freedom. And when you think, Son, about those nations that don't have any freedoms virtually, and they're on lockdown all the time, and yet in some of those nations, Christianity is exploding. The underground church, the church that isn't meeting out in the open the way you can in America, and yet they're thriving. They're bursting with faith and power and souls being won. So, there is this kingdom, the kingdom of God, that is growing, regardless of what's going on in the political sphere. And as you and I have often discussed, and probably, 90% or more of our visits on these podcasts, of course, deal with the spiritual kingdom. It is not very often that we spend too much time in the political kingdom, but the two do overlap. And because we are concerned not just about a person's eternal salvation, that's the biggest thing, but we're also concerned about many other issues in life, in this world, for people, and we recognize that there are things in America that can provide certain benefits to people that you don't have in a country like, say, Venezuela, on some of those levels of just material prosperity, blessings, food, a roof over your head, and then just, we're very concerned, of course, as Christians about any corruption anywhere, whether it be in a church, a church organization, a religious organization, a political organization. Corruption hurts people in so many ways. So Christians do speak out on issues of corruption, on cover-ups, on disinformation, misinformation, because we're about the truth. We want to promote the truth, and not to say that any one of us always gets it right. We get it wrong plenty of times. Not to say that any one of us doesn't need to be counseled and guided and instructed and critiqued. We all need critique. We all can get it wrong and do get it wrong at times. So, but none of us are above the law. None of us are above the Lord, and we're here to serve Him. So I just so appreciate, Son, what you're doing with these podcasts. This is great today to be able to dive into this topic, because I think it does ultimately then point to Jesus as the source of true freedom, true liberty, and of course forgiveness and eternal life in heaven with our Lord and Savior.
Dan Dalzell, another week, another talk, another conversation. We appreciate it. One final thing is, we say God's in control, but He also gave us this world, and we need to take care of it, or we need to do our part. And that means, whether it's voting, or whether it's going out and helping our neighbor, or whether it's, helping the community at large, whatever the case may be, we got to do our part. Kind of like what I say, God, I need a job, but I'm going to sit on the couch and watch TV all day. Chances are I'm not getting a job. But if I'm out pounding the pavement, looking online, trying to actively seek a job, then He's more apt to open doors and let me find something. And so that's what it is with us. We talk about these issues, and ultimately our goal is to get to heaven. Ultimately our goal is to reach others for Christ. And this world's going to pass away at one time, but God has given this to us so that we could be good stewards of it. And that includes us doing our part, whether it be voting, whether it be doing other things, being there for each other. We got to do it. And that's why it's also sometimes fun to kind of focus on the things like the politics that are going on right now, because we do need, as Christians, need to do our due diligence.
Definitely. Very, very well said, Son. And I couldn't agree with you more.
Dan Dalzell, author at the Christian Post. You can go to christianpost.com and just insert his name in the search bar, and all his articles will pop up. Also, a pastor at a church in Papillion, Nebraska, and that they can find more information on your Facebook page for the church, and that is what exactly?
That's if they just search for Redeemer in Papillion, Papillion. And then on Facebook, that'll pop up, and they can find more, videos there and information there, as well as you say, on the articles on a Christian Post that I've written on many different topics.
You can find me on Instagram at EdomRocks, EIDEMROCKS. I would say Twitter as well, but you'd probably get banned, so I'm not going to even bring up Twitter. Dan, thanks so much. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your thoughts, your comments, and thank you for sharing, and we look forward to next time.
Well, absolutely, Son. I sure look forward to it as well. And, finally, you mentioned Twitter. I think they've been down for a while here after the debacle they had this week. So, they're still trying to get it put together. So aren't you glad one day we're not going to have to deal with any of this tech stuff? But in the meantime, we'll use it as we can for God's glory. And thank you, Son, for having me on again today. Well,
the one entity that you can follow without any issues whatsoever is Jesus.
Amen.
He will never censor you for anything. For those of you listening, thanks for listening. Do tell a friend, and until next time, God bless.